part of the argument you all are making is in macro sense this is a good deal as compared to the alternative. But we want to ask you about some of the individual provisions in the deal that skeptics and some opponents are already talking about, and just ask you to make the best case of why people shouldn't be concerned about these provisions. The first one is this notion that the deal does not guarantee sufficient, timely access by inspectors to suspected nuclear sites. Why shouldn't people be worried about that?
Well, first of all, the deal has 24/7 access to the declared nuclear sites, and the entire nuclear supply chain is covered in the inspections regime, from the raw materials to the centrifuge production to conversion facilities. So they'd have to have an entire covert supply chain if they wanted to develop a nuclear weapon, not just one site. Then the deal allows for, and this is permanent, the IAEA to see what it wants to see when it needs to see it. So if we have suspicions about a site inside of Iran, we can go to the IAEA with that information and say we want an inspection. And here's the thing. If Iran objects to that inspection, if they say, no, you can't see that, we can overrule them if we and our European allies demand that inspection. And that will take place on a timely basis. This is a time-bound procedure. And the fact of the matter is, anything that we would want to see, we would be watching very carefully. And the fact of the matter is, we also have the ability to do inspections that can very easily detect sensitive nuclear materials. That is not something that you can hide in the closet. When you do atmospheric testing, when you test the soil around a building, when you're looking at the, how these facilities operate, we're very good at learning what is going on at a suspected site.
Ben, concern number 2 is that if Iran cheats or stonewalls, it'll be next to impossible to reimpose international sanctions that include Russia, China, and Europe. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's just not the case. There's a 10-year UN Security Council resolution that governs this deal. Under that UN Security Council resolution, if at any time during the deal Iran cheats, the sanctions are fully reimposed. And it only takes one member of the P5+1 to make a determination that Iran has violated the agreement. So even if Russia and China said, no, we don't think this is a violation, we can overrule them. And we can declare Iran in violation, and all of the sanctions, unilateral, multilateral, snap back into place.
Okay, Ben. Next one is this notion that under this deal, if it proceeds, Iran's going to have access to vast resources, billions of dollars in assets, and that they may well transfer some of that money to use towards the kind of activities, terrorism and other supports for governments the U.S. doesn't like around the world. We're simply giving them more money to use to do things adverse to the United States' interests.
Well, first of all, this is the premise of the whole deal. We put these sanctions in place to get these limitations on Iran's nuclear program to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. They have been undertaking that activity for years. We expect that they will continue to undertake activity like support for terrorism and proxies that we have very strong objections to. The point is, that would be far more dangerous if they had a nuclear weapon. And what we do with this deal is prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. Now, clearly, they're going to get relief from the nuclear-related sanctions. But let's remember that those sanctions were put in place to achieve this deal. That's why the world cooperated with us. At the same time, we think that they're far more likely to invest the resources they get in their economy, which is in terrible disrepair, has huge government debts that they have to pay down. The hardliners in Iran were not supporters of this deal. So if they saw that they were going to get some big windfall, that's not how they acted the last several months leading into this deal. They were the ones inside of Iran opposing it. So the fact of the matter is, we'll continue to have sanctions for terrorism-related activities, but it's worth getting this deal to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon.
So do you dispute the notion that they will have more money to spend on terrorism, funding terrorism around the region?
They will have more money. So I don't dispute that notion that there will be revenue that goes into Iran because they're going to get sanctions relief. We have assets frozen overseas. This is their money, first of all. It's not like we're paying them. They are selling oil where we've been able to freeze the revenue from that oil in overseas accounts. But the point is, we put those sanctions in place to get a nuclear deal. Now that we have Iran accepting these strict limitations on their nuclear program, this broad and intrusive verification regime that can give us the confidence that they are not pursuing a nuclear weapon, they will get relief from those sanctions. Again, we believe the majority of that relief will be put into their economy. But again, by definition, they will have more money generally, more revenue through sanctions relief. That is better than them having a nuclear weapon. And that's fundamentally the choice. Do you think that they should be permitted to continue an unconstrained nuclear program, potentially acquiring a nuclear weapon? Is that more dangerous than them getting sanctions relief? Our clear judgment is, it'd be far more dangerous if they had a nuclear weapon than if they get some sanctions relief from this deal.
Ben, final criticism is that when restrictions on uranium enrichment begin to phase out 8 years from now, Iran will not only have a stronger nuclear capacity, but a clear path to a bomb, that this essentially punts but does not solve the Iranian problem.
Well, first of all, there are very strict 10-year limitations on everything that they can do with respect to their centrifuges, their R&D, their facilities. There's very strong 15-year limitations, including the limitation on their stockpile, 98% of it being out of the country. But here's the thing. The prohibition on them getting a weapon, that's permanent. They're never allowed to develop a nuclear weapons program. They're never allowed to try to weaponize their nuclear program. And the transparency and verification measures under the deal, those are permanent too. So we'll have a better ability to detect any of that activity, even beyond 15 years, because of what's in this deal. And the fact of the matter is, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, the President of the United States will have an Iran that has been constrained for that period of time, that is still prohibited from getting a nuclear weapon. They'll have had the benefit of 15 years, 20 years of these inspections. And frankly, we believe that we'll be in a stronger position to make a judgment about whether or not Iran is violating its commitments and what to do about that with this deal and this transparency regime than we would be without it.
Ben Rhodes, over the next few weeks, Congress will scrutinize this in order for you to have this survive. You could do it simply by getting Democrats to stand with you. Is it your hope, though, that you'll win over some or substantial congressional Republican support as you make the case?
Well, look, we're going to make the case to everybody. They'll be hearing from the president. He's already called the leaders. They'll be hearing from the vice president, Secretary Kerry, Secretary Moniz. The fact of the matter is we understand that things are very polarized around this issue. People have not been shy about expressing their opinions. We saw a letter from 47 Republican senators long before a deal was reached declaring their opposition to this deal. But the president was very clear today. He will veto any legislation that would prevent the implementation of this deal.
But are you?
So we are focused on upholding that veto. And I would say one more thing here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm just wondering, are you writing off Republicans? Or are you hopeful that you'll get their support?
We're not writing anybody off. But again, I think one of the key things we'd say to Republicans, as well as Democrats, is one of the things Congress believes strongly in is this international sanctions regime we put together. The fact of the matter is, if we blow up the deal that international sanctions regime got us, our ability to hold together a sanctions coalition is going to fall apart. How can we have countries who worked with us, made sacrifices to cooperate with our sanctions for years to get this deal? How will they react if we then kill the deal after it's been reached? And frankly, we could put at risk not only this deal, we could put at risk the cooperation necessary to have the sanctions that really bite on Iran. That's a consequential vote for a member of Congress to take.
Ben, what is the status of Washington Post Tehran bureau chief Jason Rezaian, who's being held political prisoner in Iran? I think there was a fairly widespread expectation that his release would be part of this deal. We haven't heard anything yet.
Well, we did. First of all, we're very concerned about Jason and all of the Americans who we believe are detained unjustly in Iran. The fact of the matter is we raised these cases directly with the Iranians at the negotiating table. We did not link it to the nuclear deal for the simple reason that we did not want to suggest that if we didn't get a nuclear deal, that their release was somehow then going to be taken off the table. However, we are consistently calling for Iran to release Jason and the other Americans who are unjustly detained in Iran. We'll continue to press on that. It's a sign that there are going to continue to be areas where we have strong differences with Iran. This is a nuclear deal. We'll continue to raise those differences on these and other issues going forward.
Do you expect, though, in light of this historic agreement, that there will be immediate progress on that?
Well, we would like there to be progress on it, but we'll have to see what transpires. What we've seen throughout this process of negotiation is that there are different factions inside of Iran. There are hardliners. Then there are people who, frankly, are not people who share our values or our interests, but frankly are at a different end of the spectrum inside of Iran. And the fact of the matter is, it would be better, as the President said today, for Iran and for the Iranian people if Iran moved in a direction where they were taking steps like releasing these detained Americans, curbing their support for proxy groups and their threats to Israel in the region. That's not going to happen overnight, but we're going to continue pushing for that even as we implement this deal.